Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 14th of January. So we're starting off a new week. We stayed over that 50%, came down and visited a couple of times, and then finished right below our 2600 algorithm resistance, and same spot where they hit a little bit of snag right around that 96, 95, 50 range. Doesn't surprise me right there, because that was a popular spot where if I'm thinking about shorting, that's where I would start to add to prepare for hitting that. But a break above it, you have 2635, which is going to get you close to like that symbolic 2650, where a lot of people are talking about would be a return back to the baseline of these previous dips, a little bit above it, right over the top right there. Get my mouse to cooperate. So 2650, right about there. Just above that 35. I think our algo line that we had that popped up with the previous levels from before is spot on with that 35 range, though they like to say the convenient numbers. So what do we have? Well, short-term buyers completely fading. We almost have our full DOC short snake, where the orange is above cyan, cyan's in the middle for the tongue, and steel below. A little bit soft on the orange level spike. If it had been a clean spike, then we really would have expected to revisit right back down to that 50% and even break it, especially with green still underneath red. So within the broader weakness, we've done pretty well at holding on. The yellow shakeout line here above the magenta indicates more of that bullish trend, though you're still in the negative numbers. And the key for that, though, is when you get towards that zero line, if you don't start to make a solid push forward, you get always a rollover right at that same spot, and boom. That's usually a clean indication for us where things are headed. The NQ, it's identical, so there's no variations. Just a fraction difference with the orange here is slightly above, technically qualifying for that short snake. So interesting to see that's the only subtle variation. That may just be a little bit of weakness. Some of that softness potentially attributed to the euro setup here. Futures for Monday haven't opened up yet, so this is very early. You can see some variation. We knew that gold was still with that. Yeah, again, we talked about this where the magenta is above that plus 15 line. That's pretty strong, and as long as the red is above zero, even though it's right at the 7.5, you can get a little weakness when it breaks down, but until it dips back below zero, it's still going to hold up. So this is what the 5K looked like with the gamma function pink bar. Again, we ended up, there it is. That's the classic one. Well, this isn't even ideally perfect. Usually you want orange coming from underneath, but clean rejection where you had green moving above cyan and then boom back below. Steel rejecting just like cyan. So when you think about that, snake mouth just got really big, and green below red. You could go back further where this started to do the same thing, where you get like right here, the breaks above it. So you can be earlier with that, particularly we're not seeing any strength with magenta over 13.5. You just have to wait a little bit longer. You get a better entry, but you have to continually stay with it to make sure it doesn't flip around and go the other direction on you and break out to new highs. Here you're just seeing ABM breaks, and then boom, it starts to do its general thing. Bounced back up a little bit and then produced exactly the same thing. A little bit earlier right there would be the first indication, because you have orange crossing, which would be right there. And then signaling you would just need to follow through with green, and it continues. And sure enough, does it in strong fashion. We talked about this one at the open as it opened up, because once the bar opened, it was already cleanly above, and shakeout had broken into the negative, and then boom, it went from there. Then we popped down. We ended up with a couple little buy configurations within that. And then it pretty much just eased its way back up, got a little overbought, and then filled back in, kind of up 50% up, sort of filled in 50% halfway into each of these little moves. So kind of what people might describe as those ABC setups. Interestingly enough, in talking about the adjustments to the pink bar, this is what on the 50K it starts to look like. So the idea is that when we have the key short configurations of that breaking of the red back to the zero, comes down, and then we get the key buy turnarounds, your classic NBI with the true components of everything we need. And you can see from there it did a little hop and a skip. And then we get into these little magenta. Now I haven't worked them out when they're in between the ranges. I've only dealt with above the 76%. I've left it green on the bigger time frames. When you're above that 15, you really need to see that DOC red move into the zero, and it becomes a little bit clearer when those breakdowns happen. In this particular case, wasn't done because it reset to there, hit the 76, and boom, you would expect further decline on that. And then as it was still doing it, you ended up with the exact opposite of the next bar, where it dips below the red line and goes into a bullish configuration, all the while still making lower shakeout highs. This is one of those where, well, as you can see it right here, this is 23. So from the entry, I was doing a test where, okay, if I ended up with this, where all of a sudden I ended up with a bullish move, it would adjust the stop accordingly. Now, if we look at the 0% right there, it's at 23.16, and you can see it's exactly 2 points below the low right there, and follows it. And then the nice thing about that is, just from a test standpoint, it will they'll be able to put in the conditions to where then we would use ABM to trail. But instead of the ABM just rising dramatically, instantaneously, this will give an opportunity to follow the lows, and then when I get a close, say above the 38, then you'll be able to move to the low of the bar or break even kind of a setup, and then allow the ABM to follow from there, so it's a little bit cleaner. And this is a good one because you can put it on the 5K as well. If I remove the GAM function, what we have here is just the regular DLCon paint, which basically follows that ABM up, and then when you break below your ABM gold, it turns to red. And so sometimes you get these red-green where it pops right back above, and you don't really have as dramatic a signal. But the biggest differential is sometimes you get too many of these yellow bi-signal configurations, though the ABM only resets under certain ones that are more powerful. But if we put the layover here of the new paint bar, that's the difference. So it cleanly stays within that short configuration, gives the yellow by 1 bar later because it really wants the stronger confirmation on a big short like that. It won't do anything until you're over the 23%, just as basis. And again, it sets 25.75, and the zero happens to be 25.77. So again, and that is an input actually. So you'll be able to adjust the ATR multiple to whatever you want, or particular value wise, and that will give stops based on that value. And so in this case, it stays green until such time as it right now gets over the 50% move. But what will happen with a trade like this is it will close above there, and it'll probably set a stop that is either at the zero or slightly higher, depending on how far it is into it, and depending on what the reading is. Because in a situation like that, you end up with a clean snake, expecting a lower move. So it's worth the opportunity to say from there, it's like, okay, hey, I've got my clean snake move from 85. I'm certainly going to ride it much more to the low. And then if that doesn't have it, then what'll happen is the next buy signal, which is right over here. And that's exactly what you see right here. So this buy and then boom on that decline. So it's just a function of how you set your stop setup. Back the new one, and then we can see how it follows from there. And again, this one requires at least move below the 76, but it can also be set to, for the 5K, it'll be a slightly different one. I haven't decided yet if I'll just have parameter input changes that will allow you to adjust for the different time value charts versus having one that's completely separate program, because initially I've done it solely for the 50K, but you can see how well it just blends in even to the shorter time period. You're going to use the signal and boom goes. And we can go back. Of course, it won't be this pink color, so I was doing that to differentiate between the actual short signaling, the break of the zero, which is what that reads out at, and then boom, it opens up with the new candle setup and goes from there. And this rose color, so to speak, is just for negative trend. And you can see it's got one red dot in there, and that's just because, again, at the close of the 50%, it basically just goes back to broader trend. And broader trend is an interesting one. It's determined by what I call a big bull versus big bear. And in that case, big bear, you're going to have cyan over red with green under red. And for big bull, you're going to have what? The always long cyan moves under red. And that gives you the green, so that will differentiate. And then, of course, when, in this case, I think magenta's over 13, it requires the breakdown of the zero, and that's where you get the orange candles that, the magenta candles right there that just pop in on that break. But on a 5K, this being under the 15 definitely would be attacking as soon as I got, right here when you have this configuration, and then boom, once the cyan on an open snake like that, I'm going to be all over that because I get such a short range to the high. I'm at close there of the 91, and the high is 95.50, almost 92. So I'm really 5-point risk on that particular setup, looking for the same. And it's interesting because Isabella now has reached, in March will be 17, so she wants to start her trading career. So I was giving her some of the basic math, and I said to her, well, okay, you can imagine that if you're trading in ES, and so you're just doing one contract, and say you want to make $4,000 in a month, which is $1,000 a week. Okay, but you're only going to win 56% of the time, and you're going to have a 4-point stop. At that point, how many extra points do you need to win if you're only going to win 56 out of 100 trades? And how many total points do you need to do that? Now, obviously, that changes for every trade. You end up with a break even. You improve your profit factor. And for every trade that goes to the upside, more than 4 points, obviously you minimize, but it gives you an idea of the number of points. And it's definitely a way to go through and calculate, what you have to be expecting. If you're just going to trade for a couple of ticks here and there, well, then your stop can only be that. So then you'd have to be very judicious about it. So what I really wanted to do with these programs is give you the ability to follow some of these things that we know are going to be significant trend moves. As we pointed out on this one, this was worth 12 points on that move. Another one is going to give you, even if you wait until it turns all the way around, another 3 on that. For me, because we already knew this, 25.78 was an algo cover. That's where I was taking it because that's my expectation. So I'm covering part of it at that particular point, and racking in my, I think it was 6.5 or something like that is what really happened. And trading it from there. And that's a much more effective way to capture significant gains. I was a little more interested in this one too, particularly since I didn't get the steel dip below red and then coming back above to kind of end. Like here, you get the short signal, Steel crosses here, warning sign, hey, I might get a reversal, and of course all the little green dots. It was an interesting one because we ended up with a magenta candle right at this hammer, so it came right down towards the 50%, and I kept seeing the continuation that's covered at the 50 off of the nice higher entry when we first ended up with the orange coming across the green and coming lower, especially since we were still not at peak magenta levels, and I had a positive extreme, so it was right in there. I was like, okay, hey, why not? I'm least likely to see that fill back in, easy point to have the stop. But as it came across, we continued, and then boom, you end up with the bullish configuration right there. Oh, it gives you plenty of room to turn around and follow that one. Depending on which candle you get it there, it's like, okay, well, I can use my 50 as a stop and go from there and follow it along. And certainly it looks much cleaner when you see it that way. So it's good stuff. Just thought I'd point it out where these things are going with directionally wise. Next step will be having the ABM reset to the much more conservative entry points so that we get them. And then actually the ABM gold on these is going to follow a little bit tighter on, for instance, a break of the 23, and you're already above the 76 with the ABM gold. It's going to drop most likely somewhere between the 50 and 38% range and trail accordingly. That way it just gives it a little more relevance on turnarounds, because I've always been a big fan. Short below the ABM gold, short, and when I get a turnaround signal, hey, that's my opportunity to flip back and follow the ABM going there. But again, you can see that when it dips like that, sometimes it always rises up pretty quickly because your expectation is the momentum. But often we see with many of these moves is the pump, 50% retrace, and then a new move like this one, up 50%. And so you have to have the latitude that allows for that. So by being able to extend that low and then have it trail up after it's done appropriate maneuvers, then we go from there. I'll detail more of that another time, but just thought I'd go over this one so you can see how it's progressing. Won't take too long to be able to get that to everyone. As always though, trade well. We'll talk again later.